The calendar read, November 2005. Carlos Santana had driven to the grocery store that morning to buy his daughter a birthday cake. The day started out normal. It didn't stay that way. Because a few yards away, a 45-year-old widow was digging through a dumpster to feed her own daughter. The store manager slammed the lid shut. "How many times do I have to tell you? Get out of here! Next time I'm calling the cops!" All she'd wanted was something to eat. Her daughter had gone to bed the night before with half a bowl of rice. The manager had no idea who was sitting in the parking lot. Carlos heard everything from under the brim of his hat. He opened his car door and started walking. November mornings in San Rafael start with fog rolling in off the Pacific. It drifts over the Moran Hills, wraps around the streetlights, then pulls back once the sun climbs high enough. That morning, Carlos was sitting at his kitchen table. In front of him was a list in Deborah's handwriting: cake ingredients, candles, gift wrap, chocolate. One of their kids had a birthday coming up, and Deborah had thought of everything. Carlos folded the list, tucked it into his shirt pocket, grabbed his keys, and pulled the door shut. As he walked to the garage, he felt the crinkle of the paper against his chest. To him, that list wasn't just groceries. It was a father's silent promise that his family would always have what they needed. The dark green SUV in the garage was pushing 10 years, but the paint still held its shine. Carlos took care of his cars, not for show, just out of respect. The leather on the gearshift had worn smooth, molded to the shape of his palm, the patina of 1,000 quiet drives. He steered through the narrow streets toward the store. He pulled into the corner of the lot just before 9. The store was still quiet. One customer at the register, a young employee arranging produce, the muffled sound of boxes in the back. Carlos stepped out. His mustard yellow linen shirt was rolled to the wrists, bracelets clinking softly with each step. He adjusted his hat and reached into his pocket for the list. That's when his eyes caught the back of the store. A woman stood next to the dumpster, mid-40s, dark hair in a loose bun, wearing a faded gray jacket 2 sizes too big. Old clothes, but not neglected. Collar straight, cuffs folded in. Shoes worn, but laces tied tight. She pried the lid open with both hands, glanced over her shoulder, and reached in. Pulled out a box of pasta, checked the date, put it back. A bag of rice, checked the date, slipped it into her bag. Her hands were thin, nails trimmed short but clean. This wasn't her first time. But from the tremor in her fingers, it never got easier. The store's back door swung open. Brad stepped out, early 40s, close-cropped hair, store badge on his white shirt, a cardboard box in his hands. He spotted the woman and stopped, set the box down. He walked straight to the dumpster. "How many times do I have to tell you? Stay away from here." Sharp, final. The voice of a man who wasn't interested in a conversation. "Stop going through my trash. Next time I'm calling the cops." Patricia's hands froze. She placed the milk carton she'd been holding back on the edge of the dumpster. Didn't drop it, placed it carefully. Brad pointed at the parking lot. "I've got customers inside. Get out of here." Patricia didn't say a word. She set the single package from her bag back on the dumpster's edge, turned and started walking, somewhere between a walk and a run, head down, shoulders caved in, trying to disappear. She passed right by Carlos's car, a few feet away. Carlos was leaning against the door, watching from under his hat. Their eyes met for a split second. Carlos calm, Patricia afraid. She looked away and picked up speed, hit the sidewalk, turned the corner, vanished. Carlos hadn't moved. His left thumb was slowly turning the turquoise ring on his finger. He wasn't planning anything yet, just trying to understand. Brad slammed the dumpster lid shut. The metal rang across the lot. He grabbed his box and went inside. The only sound left was the distant cry of seagulls. Carlos kept looking, at the corner where she'd vanished, at the milk carton balanced on the dumpster's edge. Wind nudged it. It fell, rolled across the asphalt, stopped. Carlos walked into the store. Brad was behind the register. He saw Carlos and hung up the phone, sized him up. Mustard shirt, old bracelets, worn hat. Another customer. "Morning, sir. Need help finding something? Otherwise, feel free to shop and come to the register." Carlos didn't answer. He looked Brad in the eyes. 2 seconds. 3. Brad wanted to look away but couldn't. There was no anger in that look, no judgment. Just a man who was waiting for something. "The woman outside," Carlos started. He didn't finish. A young employee was walking over from the produce section. Danny, 23, short hair, the kind of kid who ate lunch with his headphones still in. He slowed as he got close, looked at Carlos's face, stopped. "Mr. Santana?" Low but certain. The color left Brad's face. His eyes bounced from Danny to Carlos and back. His lips moved, but nothing came out. Danny turned to Brad. "Brad, that's Carlos Santana, greatest guitarist in the world." Brad gripped the counter. "Santana, Carlos Santana, 30 years on the radio, 8 Grammys, Woodstock." And he'd just told the man to shop and leave. His face went red. He tried to speak, stopped. The apology he owed had nothing to do with Carlos. He knew exactly what he was guilty of. Carlos's expression hadn't changed. Same eyes, same silence. He turned to Danny. "The woman who was just outside. Do you know her?" Danny nodded, voice low. "Patricia, she's harmless. Her husband left us about 2 years ago. Long illness. She quit her job to take care of him. After he was gone, she couldn't get back on her feet. Never asked anyone for help. She's got a 15-year-old daughter, Emily. Sometimes Emily comes too, on weekends, waits around the corner. Patricia won't let her near the dumpster. She comes every morning, same time. Right when Brad puts the near-expired stuff out. Takes a few packets, leaves without a word. 2 months straight." Carlos listened. Something shifted behind his eyes. "What time does she come?" 9, every morning." Carlos touched the list in his pocket, felt the folded paper, then pulled his hand back. The birthday shopping could wait. "Will she be here tomorrow?" Danny paused. "If her daughter's still hungry, yeah." Carlos pulled his hat forward, shadow falling across his face. Didn't look at Brad. Walked to the door, got in his car, and sat without starting the engine. Then pulled out his phone and dialed. The fog had cleared. The milk carton was still on the asphalt. But before we see what happened next, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop your hometown in the comments. And if these stories speak to you, join us by hitting subscribe. Now lean back because the finest part of this story is just getting started. Next morning, 8:30, same parking lot, engine off. Carlos behind the wheel with a coffee watching the back of the store. 10 to 9, Patricia appeared. Same faded jacket, same sloped shoulders. She reached the dumpster and lifted the lid. Carlos set the coffee down and got out. Closed the door quietly. Started walking toward her. Slow, steady, bracelets clicking in the silence. Patricia heard him. Turned. Eyes wide. She recognized him. Dropped the package and started backing away. Carlos stopped, 5 or 6 yards between them. Hands up, palms open. He spoke with a voice that didn't demand an explanation, but offered a harbor. "Patricia, wait, listen to me. I'm a father too." His voice was low and warm. "I've got a birthday list in my pocket and a daughter the same age as yours." She stopped. Didn't run. Didn't come closer. 2 people on opposite sides of a dumpster standing in the morning fog. "I want to help. However you want. You decide." Her lips trembled. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let a tear fall. Carlos waited. He wasn't going anywhere. A long silence. Then she nodded. Once. Small. But there was a decision in it. Carlos walked toward the store. "Come on," he said. Inside, Brad saw Carlos and dropped his eyes. Carlos grabbed a basket and walked the aisles. Patricia hung back, not looking at the shelves, like someone in a house she hadn't been invited to. Carlos chose rice, pasta, canned goods, milk, cheese, fruit. Didn't ask what she needed, picked with the hand of someone who knew. Then he moved to the kids' section and grabbed a few things Emily's size. At the register, Brad barely got the total out. Carlos handed his card over. He placed a box of chocolate on top of the bags, left over from Deborah's list. "These were extra," he said, like it was nothing. Patricia looked at the box, then at his hands. The hard calluses at the fingertips, decades of pressing steel strings. She didn't say a word, but her eyes changed. For the first time, there was something other than shame in them. Carlos drove Patricia home, a few blocks, a ground-floor apartment in a rundown building. He carried the bags to the door. When Patricia opened it, the smell came first. Old furniture, damp walls, cheap detergent. Inside, a bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and crammed in the corner next to a school backpack, a cheap keyboard, colored tape on the keys. Do, re, mi, sol. The tape had faded in the sun. Emily had been at this keyboard for a long time. Carlos looked at it, then at Patricia. Emily's? A neighbor was throwing it out. Emily teaches herself, finds the notes online. Carlos didn't answer, but his eyes narrowed. A man with a plan forming. That evening, sitting across from Deborah, Carlos picked up the phone. "Hank, brother." "Carlos?" Surprised but warm. "How many months has it been?" "I need a favor." Carlos and Hank went back 40 years. Summer of '69, Bethel. Hank hauled cables backstage while Carlos played on it. Years later, Hank founded the Woodstock '69 Music Academy in Mill Valley. Carlos and Eddie Von Halen came to the opening. Eddie grabbed a student's guitar and played a 10-minute solo that left everyone standing. The school was Hank's way of keeping the spirit alive, music out of the glass case into everyone's hands. Carlos told him about Patricia, Emily, the colored tape on the keys. Hank listened. "I've got a spot on the cleaning crew, and Emily can start classes tomorrow." When Carlos hung up, Deborah was watching him. He looked back. Neither spoke. After 40 years of marriage, words weren't always necessary. Deborah walked to the kitchen. "We'll do the birthday shopping tomorrow," she said without turning around. Carlos smiled for the first time that day. 3 days later, Carlos drove Patricia and Emily to Mill Valley. Emily sat in the back, leaning against the window, chewing her nails. The school was inside an old wooden building. Black and white photos from '69 on the walls, instruments sounding from every direction. Hank waited at the door, 60 years old, white beard, hands calloused from decades of hauling cables. He hugged Carlos, shook Patricia's hand, looked at Emily. "Welcome. We've heard a lot about you." Patricia saw the cleaning room downstairs. Tiny shelf of supplies, schedule on the wall. Her eyes filled. She turned to Carlos. He gave a small nod. That was enough. Emily was taken into a classroom. Carlos followed. 5 or 6 kids, guitars and sheet music, a teacher. A guitar in the corner caught his eye. Paint scratched, neck worn smooth, years of student hands all over it. He picked it up, felt the weight, touched a few strings and raised an eyebrow. The G string was flat. A tiny turn of the tuning peg, another listen, a nod. His left foot started tapping, automatic. His fingers settled on the strings, and from that old beat-up body came a sound that had no business being that warm. Then samba pati. It came out like a whisper, soft, humble, bouncing off classroom walls. The kids turned. After a few bars, Carlos nodded at them. "Your turn." One kid tried a chord. Wrong. Carlos smiled and kept going. The kid tried again, closer. Another joined. The notes tangled together, imperfect but alive. Emily stood in the doorway. A piano sat in the corner. She walked over, sat down, pressed a key. Wrong. Again. Carlos opened his eyes. Emily found a chord. One of Samba Pati's lower notes. Shaky, but there. Carlos nodded and kept playing. The last note hung in the air. Strings stopped vibrating. The room went silent. 2 seconds, 3. Then Emily clapped. Alone. Then the kids. Then Hank, watching from the corridor. Carlos set the guitar down. Patricia was standing outside the glass panel, no shame on her face for the first time. He stepped out, stood next to her. Neither spoke. Then Carlos pulled the birthday list from his pocket, looked at it, and smiled. "My mother was the same way," he said. "Never asked anyone for a thing. But she learned to accept, because asking for help isn't giving up. It's refusing to give up." Patricia didn't answer. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small, rusted harmonica, edges worn, metal dulled. "It was my husband's," she said. "I want you to have it." Carlos looked at the harmonica, then at her eyes. He reached out, not to take it, but to close her hand around it. "Give this to Emily," he said. "She'll need it one day." Patricia put it back in her pocket, but her shoulders straightened for the first time. 8 months passed. Patricia told this story years later, hands resting on her knees. The same hands, thin, creased, nails trimmed short, but they weren't trembling anymore. She'd moved into a small apartment in Mill Valley, up at 5 every morning to clean the school. Emily took piano lessons every afternoon. The leap from taped keys to real ones wasn't easy, but she didn't quit. Carlos called Hank now and then. "How's Emily?" "Stubborn," Hank would say. "Must take after her father." Carlos would laugh. At Emily's first student concert, Patricia sat in the front row. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the rusted harmonica, her husband's harmonica, turned it between her fingers, then looked at the stage. Emily was sitting at the piano. Patricia pressed the harmonica to her chest. This time she let the tears come. Back in San Rafael, Brad spent every Friday morning packing near-expired products into boxes. But they weren't going into the dumpster anymore. They went into a white van by the door, Marin County Food Bank. As Brad carried the boxes, a guitar melody came through the van's radio. Samba Patay. Brad stopped, set the box down, listened, then nodded and got back to work. Patricia paused while telling the story. "If he hadn't walked into that store that morning," she said, "Emily wouldn't be at that piano today. And if this channel didn't exist, nobody would ever know this story happened." If this story moved you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Then keep watching to see what happened when Carlos Santana walked into a guitar shop and ran into David Gilmour.